further details on privacy grounds. Earlier, Yoon had told South Korea's Constitutional Court he did not order military commanders to drag lawmakers out of parliament during his short-lived bid to impose martial law. Well, with more on the ongoing political saga in South Korea, I'm joined by the editorial director of Korea Pro, Jong-min Kim. Jong-min, Yoon Suk-yeol finally attended his impeachment trial in person. What did he have to say?
He was basically reiterating the points that he made when he was first defending the martial law after his duties were informally suspended. He says that from the day that he grew up, he says, he stood by the values of liberal democracy. And declaring the martial law, he claims, was also to follow that. And he reiterated, also doubled down on his former claims about how he saw that there were signs of election rigging, election fraud at the National Election Commission, and the martial law was to see, fact check basically whether or not that was true. And he did not, like you mentioned, he also pushed back on some of the commanders' testimonials so far about Yoon asking the military to drag out the lawmakers, although that is in direct contradictory remarks sort of against multiple testimonials that were given by high-ranking military commanders that were deployed on the day of the martial law.
Well, the lawyers prosecuting the case have been very critical of his version of events. What have they said?
They also reiterated the points that they made that Yoon's decision to declare the martial law was unconstitutional. But then when it comes to the detailed question from the Constitutional Court justices, Yoon did not really give detailed answers to the questions and said that if there are any further questions that the court wants to hear from the president, he would be answering in the due course. So it seems like he is trying to minimize the level of answers that he gives to the justices or the prosecutors.
So, Jong-min, what happens next? When will we likely know the outcome of this impeachment trial?
So technically, the dates for the Constitutional Court hearings are planned for 5 separate trials, and it goes until early or mid-February. So it seems like the Democratic Party is informally preparing for a potential presidential election after Yoon is impeached in spring. And also constitutional experts are expecting that considering the urgency of the situation, they will move forward with the trials very quickly, and they are looking at potentially March, it seems. But right now, President Yoon is declining to answer any of major questions, and the CIO, and the investigators tried to get Yoon to come for summoning and questioning, but Yoon keeps declining. So if this happens, and like we seen just a few hours ago, Yoon's defense team says that it is against human rights of Yoon to try to forcefully get him out of the detainment cell, this could drag on further, it seems.
Meanwhile, outside the courtroom, President Yoon's supporters were out in force. They've been adopting Trump-style slogans and campaigning tactics, and some rallies have actually turned violent, with some referring to recent unrest as South Korea's January 6th.
There is definitely a link to that. The optics are quite similar as well, although it didn't go as violent as we saw in the Capitol Hill on January 6th. But this is the first time in years, almost decade, that we saw this sort of violence erupting among the protesters. Although the caveat here is that these are not usual conservative groups, but these are extreme right-wing groups that follow the pastor Chun Kang-un, the vanguard of the people who think that there was election fraud in South Korea. But it was quite a shock to the citizens, definitely, to see that they were destroying the court properties, which was quite a lot of damage. And also the police seem to have been overwhelmed by the level of force and violence that they saw that day.
And as we know, Yoon is also facing a separate criminal investigation into whether he led an insurrection. What could happen there? Talk us through some of the possible outcomes.
So the reason why the Democratic Party, the opposition party, initially went for the insurrection charges is because under the South Korean Constitution, they only the South Korean president gets the waiver from most of the criminal charges, aside from two things. One is insurrection, second is inciting foreign aggression. So that's why the criminal charges was initially related to the insurrection, but then the DP sort of went back and forth whether or not this constitutes insurrection. So that actually gave Yoon an advantage a little bit, saying that impeachment was not legitimate if the insurrection charges are to be dropped. But now, after that, the Democratic Party has been pointing at the second part, the foreign aggression incitement as well, looking at investigation from the prosecutors about how there were cases of Yoon and the ex-defense minister was a key man of martial law ordering military-related instructions that could have very much escalated the North Korea and South Korea military tension.
Well, we know the latest is that Yoon has been moved to a military hospital. Do we know more about his condition?
We journalists have this chat room where we keep hearing from the legal defense team, but for hours we couldn't really get a clear answer on why he was going to the hospital or whether or not he got the prior approval. But in the past few hours, it looks like the reason is not to be really released. But the explanation that we got is that it was something that his doctor asked him to check on like from months back. So that's all we know so far about the condition.
And just finally, Jong-min, if Yoon is removed from office, when do you think South Korea will have a new leader? Who might that be? Or is it too early to talk about that right now? What are people saying in Seoul?
So the polls have been interesting recently. The party support for the Democratic Party, the opposition actually went down recently with the moderates moving and the conservatives consolidating. So the People Power Party, the conservative ruling party, its support actually went up under the margin. It won this week. So it's becoming increasingly uncertain which party will actually win if there is a early presidential election. Looking at the trend, it might be maybe April. But things could change, like I mentioned earlier, if this drags on. And when it comes to the Democratic Party, unless the leader Lee Jae-myung goes to jail before then, he will probably be the presidential candidate. But for the PPP, they're going through massive internal conflict right now with a lot of factions fighting against each other. It's really unclear who will become the Yoon's successor for the People Power Party.
A lot of uncertainty in South Korea at the moment. Jong-min Kim, thanks so much for talking to us.
Thanks for having me.